everyone. Welcome to the Cultivate Podcast with the Grove Church. I'm the lead pastor there, and thank you so much for joining us. We have here with us world religions and Bible and theology expert Mark Freeman.
Hey.
How are you doing?
I'm very good.
Hey, thanks for being with us and bringing your expertise. You think I'm making fun of you, but one, I'm not. And two, I do this to everybody. To the degree that I make fun of everybody. I
just think your level or definition of expert is very different than mine.
How about all around cool relational dude who has answers to the questions that are way more down to earth and relatable than people who consider themselves experts?
That's somewhat closer.
Okay,
probably.
Perfect. So we are in the middle of a series where we've just been talking and through different kind of big picture, big question kind of stuff, problem of evil, the existence of God, those kinds of things. And we have been spending some time so far, last time in our last episode, talking about, is Jesus Christ the only way to God? And so I decided in advance, we're going to kind of break that down into two different podcasts. One where we're just kind of laying the foundation, and today where we're answering just kind of more follow-up questions to that. So last time, Mark, we started this whole thing with really like, hey, we're thinking about finding the way to God, and what does that mean? Like we said, before we even really get into that, we just kind of talked about, why do we need God at all? Why do we need to find God? Why do we need a path? And we talked about that again for 25 plus minutes. Maybe just kind of give us a summary. Kind of what are the conclusions that we came to that kind of ultimately led us to why we need only Jesus?
Because we have a real problem that we can't solve by our own merits, and that's our sin problem.
Right.
Sin singular, which I think is important. Romans 6:23 is my core verse, but it says the wages of sin, not plural, not like you got a bunch of them, but just when we have sin, now we are separated from God because he is sinless and holy. And so we've got a sin problem, and that our best efforts can't fix, and all the paths that are proposed out there all seem to center around us fixing that on our own merits. And Jesus makes this radically different claim.
Right.
That only in him.
Yeah, he is the one. He is the way. John 14 said, he is the way. He's not showing a way. He is the way. It's in who he is, and it's because of his connection and his oneness with the Father that makes him be able to make that claim. And then Peter, when just trying to get people at Pentecost, first real sermon after the Holy Spirit comes, after the resurrection, he says it. And then 20 or 30 years later in the theological reflection, Paul says it. And so we came to a conclusion that Jesus is very different than most moral teachers and most religious leaders, and that he's not putting a list together, but he's talking about a real problem that we have between us and God that only can be resolved by a mediator. And that he believed that he was the only way. Peter did, and Paul did. So we either going to agree or disagree with them, right? So I think we made a fairly compelling case for that's what the Bible teaches. But then people will have these sorts of questions, and I'm going to start with the one that, all joking aside, that I feel like you probably have the most expertise on, which is when this idea confront someone who is a devout follower of another religion. Because when people have objections, one of the things that they'll say is, well, what about a sincere Muslim? What about a sincere Buddhist? What about a faithful Hindu? What about them? And so I know, and if you're interested in Hinduism, we did a great 3-episode podcast several months ago on this topic, but they are very open to new ideas, very open to new gods, new thoughts, new paths, if you will. What would you say? Like, what would you say not only to someone who asked the question, what about a faithful Hindu? What would you say to a faithful Hindu?
Yeah, I feel very strongly, like we mentioned last time, that those lists really do. When somebody says all the paths are very similar, I have seen that is really true. Those lists look very similar, whether you're talking about the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Muslim, or even a form of Christianity. And if you just take the list and you're like, I'm trying to abide by the list, or
Right.
Judaism or whatever. And so, a devout Hindu, devout Buddhist, a devout Muslim, there's some morality there that is honestly, it's pretty impressive. In fact, one of the big arguments that I've faced in South Asian culture, and I would say this is true in a lot of the parts of the world, is that what they see and associate with Christianity is what they see in the movies. And so,
If America is a Christian nation,
if America
and these
is a
are
Christian
American
nation,
movies,
that's what it means. That's what it looks like to be a Christian. And so if we're just doing a morality, comparison, man, a lot of those communities are very moral. And their structure, the way that their children are raised. I mean, there's some very devout. I mean, and they're the correct. The morality is correct. We shouldn't do this. We should do this. And so that's beautiful and good, but it's a radically different question than the one that we're talking about,
right?
Because it doesn't remove, no matter how good we are, it doesn't solve the problem. We can't undo what we've done. You mentioned the rich young ruler, and he's like, well, even obeying your parents, like, I got 4 kiddos, and there was no doubt that they were all sinners. I didn't have to be convinced of that. But so if we're not just talking about what we're doing now or what we do in the future, but if we're talking about sin singular,
right,
then it's 2 different questions we're asking. We're not comparing our morality,
right. And I think it's in the phrasing of the question that shows that we're just talking about different things. When someone comes to me and says, what about a good Buddhist? What about a sincere Muslim? What about a faithful Hindu? Good, sincere, faithful. All 3 of those things imply that the goal, that God has some measuring stick. I'm looking for a certain level of devotion, goodness, faithfulness, sincerity, ritualistic, whatever. I'm looking for something, and I find that a lot of different places, and so I find it here, I find it here, I find it here. It's like perfect, and so then that's the bar. But that's not what we're talking about. We don't have a God who has laid out a gauntlet or a baseline for us to cross. We're talking about a God that we have deeply offended and separated ourselves from and need to be reconciled back to. So there's no amount of faithfulness or sincerity that gets you there.
Right. And it immediately goes to a comparison between us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those words, sincere, faithful, it's like, so this person, surely they win the race, whatever the competition is amongst us in our comparison amongst one another. Well, surely they're, I had an international student friend that was from Senegal, and man, he wasn't just playing around about it. I mean, he would ceremonially cleanse himself and pray 5 times a day. One of the most moral college students in a college dorm that was very immoral of any of the students that I was spending time with or talking to about these things. But if we're comparing one to another, he won.
Right.
But that's not what this is. This is a comparison us with a perfect, holy God. And that standard is just that's a way different comparison.
Yeah. And so I would give the same answer to, hey, what about the sincere, faithful, good Buddhist? I would give the same answer to that to what about the sincere, good, faithful Christian? What is not your level of sincerity, goodness, or faithfulness within this particular religious club that is the bar? I mean, when it says, hey, show us the way to God, Jesus didn't say, I go to any of your local churches, get plugged in, get connected, go to their membership class, join a small group, serve in the toddler room, and they'll show you the way. It didn't have anything to do with participation in an organized religion. This religion, Christianity, is the only way to God. Being a part of a Christian church, being a member of a Christian church is the only way to God. It is Jesus. And a faithful church will be faithful to help people recognize that Jesus is the vehicle. But you could be, by these definitions, a sincere, good Christian religion participant and miss the point. Because it wasn't about religious devotion amongst a particular subset of morality rules that a religion says. It is about who Jesus is and what he did.
Right.
So we don't need modifiers like sincere, good, or faithful. We need faith in Jesus. Faithful is something you do. Faith in Jesus is trust in something that he did. Mm-hmm. And so it's not, I mean, to me, the objection I have is not to, well, what about a good Buddhist? It's the use of the word good, sincere, and faithful in the first place.
Yeah, a good person, no matter what they're, because again, the lists are really, really similar. Right. So it's not a target towards any.
And God's not looking for you to just sincerely believe in something. Mm-hmm. He's looking for you to put your faith in him through his son, Jesus.
Which really, what you're believing in and following all those lists, you're believing in yourself.
Right.
I mean, that's the target of your belief is my ability to do this thing. You know, I was just thinking about this, man. We've talked about how growing up, both of us loved playing basketball. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember the day. I remember it really clearly. The day I played against a real basketball player.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, a guy that could play at a D1 level, mm-hmm. And just realized, oh, I thought I was good. You know, I was sincere. I was faithful. I played basketball every day growing up. I had all kinds of dreams. I really wanted to be a basketball player. But you know, there's just, doesn't matter when I meet.
Right.
I was never
the real deal.
When somebody that's a foot taller than me and that much quicker is just different. And I think we don't realize that we're playing around in elementary school, and the one that we're really compared to is on a whole different level.
Right. All right. So we'll go to the next level question here. And I don't know if this question will put you on the spot or not, but if the difference between finding God and not finding God is putting your faith in the person of Jesus, what about a person who never gets the opportunity to hear about Jesus? What happens to them?
Well, and this is my, as I've wrestled with this throughout my life,
right.
Sometimes we look at this question, I think, the wrong way, or at least I have, because it is insane that this holy God would be good enough to make a way, that he would have so much grace and mercy that he would make a way. So our first thought is we look at us, we look at mankind, and we say, well, surely there should be, a chance. Surely there should be. That was a good person. They don't deserve punishment for sin. Right. Was it really because our understanding of how bad sin is just, we just trivialize it. It's not that big of a deal. But evidently to God, it's a really, really big deal. Enough that he came, he gave up his life, and so it's the reason why this incredible news is so good. And it's so much an important thing that we would make sure, as far as it depends on us, that we would be a part of taking that good news everywhere. He gave us that opportunity to be a part of that. And That's the reason we have to take it so seriously. So
That's good.
so that there is nobody that
Right.
is outside of the hearing. It is interesting to me that most of the people that make that argument the loudest are usually not the ones giving the most effort to getting the good news out there.
Right. And I think one of the ways that people will talk about this that I think, again, shows just a deep misunderstanding of the gospel, which is kind of why we started that way on the previous episode, is, and I was really careful in the way that I phrased the question, which is, the way to find God is by putting your faith in Jesus. What about people who don't, right? I think people think of it in terms of it is accepting Jesus that gets you to heaven, gets you to God, and it is rejecting Jesus that separates you from God. But your state in sin is separation from God.
You're already separated.
You are separated from God not based on how you handled Jesus. That is not the determiner. He's not going to look and say, okay, did you say yes or no to Jesus? Well, I didn't say yes or no. No one ever asked.
I never even knew.
I mean, it's going to be sinner or not. Yes, for everybody. And then pass out. Okay, well, now you're over here. And then the only way to get over here, what did you do with Jesus? Did you say yes to Jesus? Then you can go over. It's not a rejection of Jesus that separates you from God. And I think that is important, because if rejection of Jesus is what gets you there, then it's a confusing question. What about someone who never really rejects Jesus? They never had the opportunity to do that. But then we kind of take it another step here. Okay, so my sin got me there, but I can get out by accepting Jesus. I never got the opportunity to do that. So I understand that I can't really say, at least for the sake of this part of the argument, I understand. Let's assume I understand why God could separate me from him because of sin. But it is not fair that some people got a chance to say yes and I didn't. Why would God do something like that is so unfair?
Oh, that some would get the opportunity and some...
I never got the opportunity. It is unfair that God would give some an opportunity and some not.
Yeah, I mean, one side of the answer to that question, and early in Romans, it talks about that, even in creation, God has made himself and his holiness known.
You want to read it? I got the passage pulled up.
Sorry, I didn't even know.
Romans 1.
Man, if my eyes will work that far, I think you better. It looks blurry to me.
The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse.
So there is a revelation that everyone has, in general, just in creation. We talked about in the last episode that it has also just been my finding and experience that people feel that. Mm-hmm. They don't even have to be told it. They feel it, and they go looking to worship a tree or to worship something.
Right.
And they recognize that there's something going on here with this incredible creation, and there's a yearning for that's there. And then again, the specific revelation of the good news. God has given us a specific, Jesus left us with the task.
Right.
Man, I want the world to know. Would you guys, and then, man, honestly, Charlie, there's a level of the sovereignty of God that I don't understand. I do understand and believe in his incredible character and that he has defined himself as love.
Right.
And so the way that those things that I can't put my mind around all come together, there's a deep trust in his character. But I know that the task is serious and it's urgent because that's the way it's been communicated to us in the specific revelation in the scriptures. Hey, we got to get the message out.
It's good. You know, there's several passages in the Old Testament where God is describing himself and his character and what he's like, and he's just and he's good and all these things. And it says that he gives grace and favor to those who are faithful to him to the 1,000th generation. But, but will judge, someone who is unfaithful to the 3rd or 4th generation. It's an interesting contrast between God's justice and his goodness and his grace, and kind of helping people in the Old Testament kind of understand that. And you look back on that, and it's like, man, I think about even my parents, who in different ways kind of grew up some really difficult circumstances and made decisions to follow Christ and trust Christ and to overcome some deep generational hurt, to live a life putting their faith and trust in Christ and raising a family to help us, right? Do my parents deserve the blessing that comes from God that their kids, their grandkids, their great-grandkids, their great-great-grandkids are going to be in a situation where they're more likely to find Jesus because of their faithfulness? So that's what God says. If you are faithful to me, you're going to see this for generations. I mean, I think that is a great characteristic of God, that he will take someone who is faithful to him and bless generations of that. And that's what this is, right? I had the opportunity to hear about Jesus a lot very early on. Why? Because my parents put me in a situation to do that. And God rewards things like that. But it also says that, man, if you make a decision to reject, to pursue sin, and to not pursue God, there are consequences of that carry on. And I think it's one of those things where we may not like it, but I don't think you could say that it is unfair or that it is unjust. I think we just don't like consequences.
Right.
And the consequences of my unfaithfulness to God is generational trauma. And the consequence of a culture that chooses to reject God is that you're going to raise children who don't even really get the opportunity to. And we're gonna put that on God. But here's the thing, like you said, I trust in the character of God. That God is good and God is faithful. Which leads us to this last one. And I'm sitting here looking at the time, and I apologize to everyone for bringing this up with such little time remaining. So this is often referred to as the noble savage. I don't think in 2024 you can use the word savage. So I apologize. But this way the argument has been historically described. So we imagine someone on a deserted island, or maybe maybe a small little tribe, and they're on this island, separated from everything else. All they know is the sun and the waves and the trees and all these things. But the elder of this tribe is like, there has to be more than just these trees. There is a creator behind all of this. And rather than worshiping this tree that gives me shade and food and the water that quenches my thirst and gives life to the plants and gives us fish to eat, rather than worshiping that, I'm going to worship the God who made all of these things. And then even maybe that guy is like, and the more I think about it, this God must be so magnificent that I don't measure up. And all on his own, he is receiving this revelation from God that you talked about in Romans 1. He's receiving it and he's responding to it. But still, no one gets the name of Jesus to him, is God going to be like, close enough, right? Like, you know, I mean, you seem like you kind of got it all. You just didn't know Jesus' name. I can fill you in with that later. What are your thoughts on that? You ever heard that before? You ever heard it put that way before?
Yeah. I think that there is this progression to brokenness, separation from this God, believing in the character of this God, and that there's an answer. Mm-hmm. That he must have an answer, and I trust in what that answer is. And the idea of that answer and that name being Jesus, but maybe never have receiving that name. That's where I go again to the sovereignty of God and just trust in his character. You know, I also know a lot of stories, and I'm sure you do too. In fact, you might have met this guy. There's one guy that I know who lived in a place, never had heard the name, traveled to the Ukraine. I don't know how much this guy Roshan was seeking. Mm-hmm. But the first time I met him, one of the most devout followers of Jesus that I've ever met. But he traveled from a place where he was not going to get a hearing to a place where you also wouldn't think he would get a hearing in the Ukraine, but meet somebody who's there, who then shares it with him, and then he takes it back to his family. And I just think that that's the kind of thing that God does,
right?
You know? And
I thought you were going to talk about our mutual friend who Jesus visited him in a dream.
Oh, that too. Yeah. That, moves to the other side of the world, not with no intention, but starts to get really curious, knowing that there's another answer than the one he's been presented. And God just surrounds him with the people who then begin to reveal that and share that with him. And through all kinds of ways, including dreams, he reveals himself to him and confirms that it's all true. Yeah. I just know a lot of stories like that where God intervened in the person who was really seeking after, knowing that his goodness wasn't going to get him there or her there, and she needed. Right. And
have you read or heard of the book Eternity in Their Hearts by Don Richardson?
Yeah.
I read this probably 30 years ago, and it's a really interesting thing. And it is actually talking about these tribes of people. And there's several stories where these missionaries would come to these tribes, and the tribes would just celebrate when they got there. Like, why are you so excited? It's like, the God of the heaven told us that a white man with a book was going to tell us who God really is. And so we've just been waiting. And just lots of stories like that. Or they'll go to this place and they'll talk to these people and be like, oh, yeah. And they'll tell them about Jesus. Like, yeah. We didn't know his name, but we knew that the God of the heavens sent his son down, and we were just waiting for somebody to tell us who he was. Thanks. And so on the one hand, when you hear the story of the noble savage, part of me is like, man, you're describing a scenario. Like, that's not everybody who is every tribe everywhere, right? It's probably rare. And you're describing a scenario under which, what if somebody like that exists and no missionary ever got to them? Well, I don't know that that's ever happened, but I do know that there are a lot of times where that did happen and God brought somebody to them or brought them to the people. Mm-hmm. And so I believe in the faithfulness of God, that if there are people out there with a heart to hear, God's going to get them, someone. But I think that, again, it points to the thing that our resident world missions heart for the world kind of guy would say. I mean, you keep asking all these questions and you just keep saying it all back. That's why we got to go.
I mean, we can't just,
That's why we got to tell somebody.
Look at ourselves in the mirror and say, well, I have good news, and what should I do with good news? And
And I think it's important, as we just kind of reflect on this, to kind of move beyond just the theoretical. If Jesus really is the way to be at peace with God, and we know that good news, it's beyond just a theological discussion. It is the first part of a compulsion that God gives us to share that good news with the world. So in addition to learning, I hope that also you can be compelled in your heart to move forward, and you playing your part in getting that good news to your family, to your community, and to the world. And so, Mark, thanks for being with us. And we are going to be back next week. We're going to talk a little bit about the resurrection, and I hope you will come back and join us for that. And again, so thankful that you joined us. And if you are not connected to The Grove, we would love for you to be. You can find us at thegrovechurch.org/connect. All our information about Sunday, stuff we've got online. There's a place where you can send us a prayer request. Any way that we can help you, any questions you have, please let us know. Again, I'm Charlie. This is Mark. Thanks for joining us.